Long before the pyramids of Egypt pierced the desert sky, and even before the first whispers of Sumerian civilization echoed in Mesopotamia, the ancestors of the Inuit were already charting a course through some of the most unforgiving landscapes on Earth. Their journey began not in the familiar cradle of civilization, but in the vast, ancient expanse of Beringia, a land bridge now submerged beneath the Bering Strait, which once connected Siberia and Alaska. This was a world shaped by ice, where colossal glaciers sculpted continents and sea levels plummeted, revealing new pathways for life. It was here, perhaps as far back as 30,000 years ago, that the earliest human footprints pressed into the frozen earth of what would become the North American Arctic. Imagine a time when woolly mammoths roamed alongside ancient bison, and the air itself seemed to hum with the raw power of a world still finding its form. The first inhabitants of this frigid frontier were not yet the people we know as Inuit, but their distant forebears, a diverse mosaic of nomadic hunter-gatherers whose resilience laid the very groundwork for what was to come. These were the Paleo-Arctic peoples, and their story is one of profound adaptation, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to not just survive, but to thrive in the face of immense challenge. The archaeological record, though sparse and often buried beneath millennia of permafrost and shifting ice, offers tantalizing glimpses into their lives. Tools crafted from stone, bone, and antler, unearthed from ancient campsites, speak of a sophisticated understanding of their environment. Spear points, finely flaked and designed for hunting large game, tell us of a people intimately connected to the rhythms of the hunt. They followed herds of caribou and muskox, their movements dictated by the migrations of their prey, their very existence interwoven with the delicate balance of the Arctic ecosystem. One of the earliest and most enigmatic cultures to emerge in this period is known as the Denali complex, dating back roughly 10,000 to 8,000 years ago. Their distinctive microblade technology, tiny, razor-sharp flakes of stone set into bone or antler handles, suggests a highly efficient approach to toolmaking, maximizing precious resources in a land where raw materials were often scarce. These microblades could be used for everything from cutting meat and hides to shaping wood and bone, a versatile toolkit for a people on the move. Historians still debate the exact origins of this technology. Some scholars propose an independent development in Beringia, while others see strong connections to similar tool traditions found across Siberia, suggesting multiple waves of migration and cultural exchange across the land bridge. This ongoing discussion highlights the complex tapestry of human movement and innovation during this deep prehistoric period. As the last great ice age began its slow retreat, around 10,000 years ago, the climate warmed, and the land bridge of Beringia was gradually submerged by rising sea levels. This event, a slow, inexorable swallowing of a continent-spanning pathway, fundamentally reshaped the Arctic world. It severed the direct land connection between Asia and North America, isolating populations and fostering distinct cultural trajectories. The peoples who remained in the North American Arctic were now truly committed to this icy realm, their future inextricably linked to its vast, cold embrace. From these ancient roots, new cultures began to blossom, each refining the art of Arctic living. The Paleo-Eskimo traditions, emerging around 4,500 years ago, represent a significant evolutionary step in this journey. These groups, often categorized by archaeologists into distinct phases like the Arctic small tool tradition ASTT, were the direct ancestors of the modern Inuit and Yupik peoples. Their arrival marked a profound shift in Arctic adaptation, characterized by an even greater specialization in hunting marine mammals and a more extensive use of the coastal environment. The Arctic small tool tradition, spanning from around 2500 BCE to 800 BCE, is particularly fascinating. Its hallmark is an incredibly refined toolkit, miniaturized and exquisitely crafted, often from chert or obsidian. These tools included tiny burins for grooving bone and antler, delicate scrapers for preparing hides, and composite harpoon heads designed for efficiency and repair. The sheer ingenuity of these early Arctic engineers is breathtaking. Imagine a hunter, miles from any permanent settlement, needing to repair a broken harpoon. With a small kit of interchangeable parts, they could quickly fashion a new tip, a testament to a deep understanding of resourcefulness and modular design. One lesser-known detail about the ASTT is their sophisticated use of toggling harpoons. Unlike simple barbed spears, a toggling harpoon head detaches from the shaft after striking an animal, then turns sideways or toggles beneath the skin, securing the prey more effectively. This innovation was revolutionary for hunting seals, walruses, and even smaller whales, allowing hunters to retrieve large, powerful animals from the water with greater success. This technology, refined over centuries, became a cornerstone of Arctic marine hunting and remains a testament to their deep understanding of animal anatomy and physics. Their settlements, though often temporary, show evidence of organized, communal living. Circular tent rings, sometimes lined with stones, suggest dwellings designed to withstand fierce Arctic winds. Food caches, buried to preserve meat and blubber in the permafrost, speak of careful planning and a deep knowledge of food preservation in extreme cold. These were not just survivalists, they were innovators, engineers, and naturalists, intimately attuned to the subtle cues of their environment. The spread of the Arctic small tool tradition across the vast distances of the North American Arctic, from Alaska eastward across the Canadian Arctic and into Greenland, is another remarkable feat. This expansion, occurring over a relatively short period of time, suggests a highly mobile people, adept at traversing immense, often featureless landscapes. They likely traveled by foot in summer, and perhaps by dog sled or even early forms of kayaks in winter, though direct evidence for these modes of transport from such an early period is scarce. Their ability to adapt to varying regional resources, from caribou on the tundra to seals along the coast, further underscores their remarkable flexibility. As the millennia passed, the Paleo-Eskimo cultures continued to evolve, giving rise to distinct regional traditions. The Dorset culture, flourishing from around 500 BCE to 1500 CE, is one of the most intriguing. Named after Cape Dorset in Nunavut, where many of their artifacts were first discovered, the Dorset people developed a unique material culture and an even more specialized approach to Arctic life. Dorset art, often carved from ivory, bone, and antler, is particularly captivating. Small, exquisitely detailed animal figures, bears, seals, birds, and human-like effigies reveal a rich spiritual and symbolic world. These carvings are not merely decorative. They often possess a haunting quality, their smooth, polished surfaces seeming to hold ancient secrets. The Dorset people were also known for their innovative tools, including snow knives for building igloos, elaborate harpoon heads, and distinctive soapstone lamps used for light and heat. One of the enduring mysteries surrounding the Dorset culture is their apparent lack of bows and arrows, a technology widely used by other contemporary Arctic groups and their predecessors. While they were skilled hunters, relying on spears, harpoons, and traps, the absence of archery tools from their archaeological record has puzzled scholars for decades. Some theories suggest a cultural preference for close-range hunting techniques, perhaps due to the specific types of game they pursued, or the dense fog and whiteout conditions common in their environment, which might have rendered archery less effective. Others speculate about a loss of the technology, or simply a different evolutionary path in their hunting strategies. This scholarly debate highlights the gaps in our understanding of these ancient peoples, reminding us that the past often holds more questions than answers. The Dorset people were masters of the sea ice, developing sophisticated techniques for hunting seals at their breathing holes and constructing elaborate snow houses. Their ability to live for extended periods on the frozen ocean, sustained by marine mammals, was a testament to their deep knowledge of the Arctic environment. They were a people deeply connected to the land and sea, their lives intimately intertwined with the cycles of ice and open water. However, around 1000 CE, a new wave of people began to arrive in the North American Arctic from Alaska. These were the Thule people, the direct ancestors of today's Inuit. Their arrival marked a significant cultural shift, and their story will continue in our next section. But for now, let us reflect on the profound legacy of these early Arctic inhabitants, the Paleo-Arctic and Paleo-Eskimo peoples. They were the trailblazers, the innovators, the first to truly understand and adapt to this magnificent, challenging world. Their resilience, ingenuity, and deep connection to the land laid the foundation for all who would follow, etching a remarkable chapter into the grand tapestry of human history. Their spirit, a whisper carried on the Arctic wind, still echoes across the vast, silent landscapes they once called home. If you're enjoying this, make sure to subscribe and leave in the comments the time and place you're listening from. As the Dorset culture, with its deep roots in the ancient ways, slowly receded like the winter ice, a new people began their journey across the vast, shimmering expanse of the Arctic. These were the Thule, a name whispered through time, marking the direct ancestors of the modern Inuit. Their arrival was not a sudden invasion, but a gradual, persistent unfolding, much like the slow creep of a glacier shaping the land. Originating from the Bering Strait region, likely in what is now Alaska, the Thule embarked on a remarkable expansion, a testament to their ingenuity and adaptability. This grand migration, beginning around 1000 CE, saw them spread eastward across the Canadian Arctic and eventually reaching Greenland, transforming the human landscape of the North. Imagine the crisp air, the endless horizon, the glint of sunlight on snow as these intrepid voyagers set out. Unlike the Dorset, who primarily hunted seals from breathing holes in the ice, the Thule possessed a more diverse and sophisticated toolkit, allowing them to exploit a wider array of Arctic resources. Their most significant innovation was arguably the open water hunting of large marine mammals, particularly whales. This was a monumental undertaking, requiring not just courage and skill, but also a high degree of communal organization. Picture a fleet of umiaks, large, open boats made of sealskin stretched over a wooden frame, gliding silently across the frigid waters, paddled by a coordinated crew. These vessels, capable of carrying many people and their gear, were essential for their eastward journey and for their whaling expeditions. The Thule developed specialized harpoons, often tipped with slate or bone, designed to penetrate the thick blubber of a whale, attached to long lines and floats made from inflated sealskins. These floats would tire the whale, preventing it from diving too deep or escaping, allowing hunters to eventually close in for the kill. The successful hunting of whales, particularly the immense bowhead whale, provided an abundance of resources. Not only did it offer vast quantities of meat and blubber for food and fuel, but the massive bones were also invaluable. They were used to construct dwellings, tools, and even sleds. This ability to consistently secure such large prey led to a more settled lifestyle and larger communities than those of their predecessors. While the Dorset often lived in smaller, more dispersed groups, the Thule frequently established semi-permanent settlements, especially in areas rich with marine life. These settlements often featured impressive communal houses, sometimes built partially underground for insulation, with whalebone rafters forming the structural framework, then covered with sod and snow. Imagine the warmth and camaraderie within these large dwellings, a stark contrast to the biting wind outside, as families shared stories and meals, the flickering light of a blubber lamp casting long shadows on the walls. The Thule's technological prowess extended beyond whaling. They were masters of dog sledding, a crucial innovation that allowed for efficient overland travel and the transportation of heavy loads across vast distances. The Dorset, while using dogs, did not develop the sophisticated sledding techniques seen with the Thule. Picture a team of strong, intelligent dogs, their breath misting in the cold air, pulling a sled laden with supplies, their paws padding softly on the snow. This mobility was vital for their expansion and for maintaining connections between distant communities. They also developed advanced snow goggles, crafted from bone or wood with narrow slits, to protect their eyes from the blinding glare of the sun on snow and ice, a simple yet profound invention for survival in their environment. Another key difference lay in their pottery. While the Dorset had some rudimentary pottery, the Thule produced more refined and functional ceramic vessels, often used for cooking and storage. A seemingly small detail speaks to a more complex domestic life, and perhaps a greater emphasis on food preparation and preservation. Historians still debate the precise mechanisms of the Thule expansion and why they so effectively displaced or absorbed the Dorset. Was it superior technology, a larger population, or simply a more efficient way of life that allowed them to thrive where the Dorset eventually faded? It's likely a combination of factors, a testament to the Thule's dynamic culture. Some theories suggest that the Thule's more aggressive hunting techniques and larger social groups may have given them an advantage in resource competition, while others point to environmental shifts that might have favored their particular adaptations. The Thule culture wasn't just about survival. It was a vibrant tapestry woven with art, spirituality, and social complexity. Their artistic expressions, often carved from bone, ivory, or wood, depicted animals, human figures, and intricate patterns. These carvings were not merely decorative. They often held spiritual significance, serving as amulets, tools, or ceremonial objects. Imagine the skilled hands of an artisan, patiently shaping a piece of walrus ivory into a delicate bird or a powerful polar bear, each stroke imbued with meaning. Their spirituality was deeply connected to the natural world. A reverence for the animals they hunted and the spirits that inhabited the land, sea, and sky. Shamans played a vital role in their society, acting as intermediaries between the human and spirit worlds, conducting rituals for successful hunts, healing the sick, and guiding their communities through challenging times. The social structure of the Thule was largely egalitarian, though skilled hunters and respected elders held significant influence. Cooperation was paramount for survival, especially in the demanding task of whaling. The success of a hunt benefited the entire community, fostering a strong sense of collective responsibility. This communal spirit extended to their sharing practices, ensuring that everyone had access to food and resources, a crucial element in a land where scarcity could be a constant threat. The Thule also engaged in extensive trade networks, exchanging goods like furs, tools, and raw materials across vast distances, connecting disparate communities and facilitating the spread of ideas and innovations. As the Thule moved eastward, they encountered the remnants of the Dorset culture. While archaeological evidence suggests some interaction, the exact nature of their relationship remains a subject of scholarly discussion. Some believe there might have been some cultural exchange, while others argue for a more rapid displacement of the Dorset, who, facing a changing climate and perhaps new competition, found their traditional ways increasingly challenged. The Thule, with their more robust technology and broader resource base, were better equipped to adapt to the evolving Arctic environment. This period, roughly from 1000 CE to 1500 CE, marks a pivotal transition in Arctic history. A time when the Thule established the cultural foundations that would eventually evolve into the modern Inuit way of life. One lesser-known detail about the Thule is their sophisticated understanding of astronomy. Living under the vast, clear Arctic sky, where the aurora borealis danced and the stars shone with an intensity rarely seen elsewhere, they developed an intricate knowledge of celestial movements. This wasn't just for wonder, it was practical. The stars served as navigational aids during long journeys, and the changing positions of the sun and moon helped them track the seasons, crucial for hunting and travel. Imagine a Thule elder gazing up at the Milky Way, pointing out constellations, each with its own story and significance, passed down through generations. This deep connection to the cosmos underscores their holistic relationship with their environment, where every element, from the smallest snowflake to the distant stars, held meaning. The Thule's journey was not without its challenges. The Arctic is an unforgiving land, and survival demanded constant vigilance and resilience. Famines, harsh winters, and the ever-present dangers of hunting large animals were realities they faced. Yet they thrived, demonstrating an extraordinary capacity for innovation and adaptation. Their expansion across the Arctic was not a single continuous push, but a series of movements, settlements, and further migrations, often influenced by the availability of resources and the movements of marine mammals. The warmth of the medieval warm period, which roughly coincided with their expansion, might have also played a role, potentially opening up new sea lanes and making travel slightly less arduous. Though this is another area where historians continue to explore the precise impact. The legacy of the Thule is profound. They not only populated the vast Arctic, but also laid the groundwork for the rich and enduring culture of the Inuit. Their technologies, their social structures, their spiritual beliefs, and their deep connection to the land and sea all contributed to the formation of a resilient and vibrant people. As we envision their journey, we can almost hear the rhythmic splash of paddles, the barking of sled dogs, and the joyful shouts of a successful hunt echoing across the ice-laden landscape. Their story is one of remarkable human achievement, a testament to the power of ingenuity and community in the face of immense environmental challenges. They were true masters of the Arctic, shaping its human history and leaving an indelible mark on its frozen canvas. The Thule's mastery of the Arctic environment was a continuous process of learning and refinement. Their understanding of animal behavior, for instance, was unparalleled. They knew the migration patterns of whales, the denning habits of seals, and the movements of caribou, with an intimacy that only comes from generations of observation and survival. This ecological knowledge was passed down through oral traditions, stories, and practical instruction, ensuring that each new generation was equipped with the wisdom of their ancestors. Consider the intricate knowledge required to track a polar bear across vast stretches of ice, or to predict where seals would surface for air. These were not mere skills. They were a profound connection to the living world around them. The development of the kajak, or kayak, was another critical Thule innovation. While earlier cultures might have used rudimentary watercraft, the Thule perfected the kajak into a sleek, fast, and stable hunting vessel, perfectly suited for single hunters pursuing seals and other smaller marine mammals. Imagine the hunter, almost becoming one with the kajak, his movements fluid and silent, gliding through the water, a spear poised for the strike. The kajak was not just a boat. It was an extension of the hunter, a tool crafted with precision and deep understanding of hydrodynamics and the demands of the Arctic Sea. It allowed for stealth and agility that larger umiaks could not provide, complementing their whaling efforts by diversifying their hunting capabilities. Their clothing, too, was a marvel of adaptive design. Crafted from animal skins and furs, often caribou or seal, Thule garments were meticulously tailored to provide maximum warmth and protection against the brutal cold, wind, and moisture. They often employed a system of layered clothing, with an inner layer of fur facing the skin for insulation, and an outer layer with fur facing out for protection. The intricate stitching, often using sinew as thread, created strong, waterproof seams. Hoods, mittens, and boots were all integral parts of this sophisticated system, ensuring that every part of the body was shielded. This was not just practical attire. It was a testament to their deep knowledge of materials and their environment, a form of engineering honed over centuries. The Thule also possessed a rich oral tradition, a vibrant tapestry of myths, legends, and historical accounts passed down from generation to generation. These stories served multiple purposes. They entertained, educated, and reinforced cultural values. They spoke of creation, of heroic hunters, of mischievous spirits, and of the profound relationship between humans and the animal world. Imagine sitting in a communal house, the wind howling outside, as an elder recounts a tale of a great whale hunt or a journey across the frozen sea, the voices of ancestors echoing through the narrative. This oral history was the library of their culture, preserving knowledge and identity in a world without written language. The sheer scale of the Thule migration and their cultural impact is truly remarkable. From a relatively localized origin, they managed to colonize an entire continent's Arctic coastline, adapting to diverse regional conditions while maintaining a core cultural identity. This expansion, spanning hundreds of years and thousands of miles, is one of the most impressive human migrations in history. It speaks to an incredible drive, resilience, and capacity for innovation. When we consider the challenges, the vast distances, the extreme cold, the unpredictable nature of the Arctic environment, their achievements become even more awe-inspiring. The transition from the Thule to the modern Inuit is a continuous evolutionary process, rather than a sharp break. Over time, as climate conditions shifted, as new technologies emerged, and as external influences began to appear, the Thule culture gradually transformed. Around the 16th to 18th centuries, as the Little Ice Age brought colder temperatures and more extensive sea ice, the open water whaling practices of the early Thule became more challenging. This led to a greater reliance on seal hunting, often from breathing holes in the ice, a technique reminiscent of the Dorset, but executed with Thule tools and efficiency. This adaptability, this willingness to shift strategies in response to environmental changes, is a hallmark of the Arctic peoples and a direct legacy of their Thule ancestors. The first encounters with Europeans, beginning in the late 10th century with the Norse in Greenland and later with explorers and whalers in the Canadian Arctic, marked another significant turning point. While these early interactions were often sporadic, they introduced new goods, new ideas, and unfortunately, new diseases, which would have profound impacts on Thule communities. The Thule, however, maintained their distinct cultural identity and continued to thrive in their homeland, a testament to the strength and resilience forged over centuries of living in harmony with the Arctic. Their story is a powerful reminder of humanity's enduring capacity to not only survive, but to flourish in the most challenging environments on Earth, leaving behind a legacy of ingenuity, community, and profound respect for the natural world. The slow drift of centuries brought with it new currents, both in the ice-laden seas and in the human story unfolding along their shores. As the Thule culture solidified its hold, its people, the ancestors of today's Inuit, were not alone in the vast northern expanse. Far across the churning waters, the different people, driven by a restless spirit of exploration and a hunger for new lands, were also pushing the boundaries of their known world. These were the Norse, the Vikings, whose longships, with their dragon-headed prows, had already plied the North Atlantic for generations. Around the late 10th century, a bold figure named Eric the Red, exiled from Iceland for manslaughter, set sail westward. His journey led him to a vast, ice-bound land, which he, with a shrewd sense of marketing, named Greenland, hoping to entice settlers. And indeed, others followed. By the early 11th century, Norse settlements, primarily agricultural, were built to attract settlers. Began to dot the southwestern coast of Greenland, a testament to their remarkable adaptability in a harsh environment. They built churches of stone and turf, raised livestock, and harvested what meagre crops the short summers allowed, clinging to their European traditions in this distant, frigid outpost. For a time, the Norse in Greenland lived in relative isolation, their world bounded by the fjords and ice. But the land was not entirely empty. They occasionally encountered earlier inhabitants, people they called Skraelings, a term that likely encompassed various indigenous groups, including the Dorset people, who were still present in parts of Greenland when the Norse arrived. These early encounters were often brief, sometimes wary, and occasionally hostile. The Dorset, with their distinctive small tools and quiet hunting practices, were a different people from the Thule. They were less numerous, perhaps more reclusive, and their technology was less advanced in terms of weaponry compared to the incoming Europeans. As the Thule expanded eastward across the Canadian Arctic and into Greenland, they too would eventually encounter these Norse settlers. This meeting of two vastly different cultures, one deeply rooted in the Arctic environment, and the other a transplanted European society, marked a pivotal, though often understated, moment in northern history. Imagine the sight. A Norse farmer, perhaps tending his sheep near a fjord, looking up to see a strange new kind of kayak gliding silently towards shore, or a group of Thule hunters, their harpoons ready, observing the unfamiliar longhouses and livestock of the newcomers. These initial interactions were a complex tapestry of curiosity, trade, and sometimes conflict. The Thule, with their superior hunting technology and deep understanding of the Arctic, likely held an advantage in terms of survival skills in the extreme environment. They possessed bows and arrows, sophisticated harpoons, and swift kayaks and uniaks, perfectly adapted for hunting marine mammals. The Norse, on the other hand, brought iron tools, woven cloth, and perhaps a few trinkets of European manufacture. Archaeological evidence from Norse sites in Greenland and from Thule sites in the Canadian Arctic and Greenland offers tantalizing glimpses into these exchanges. Fragments of Norse chainmail, pieces of iron, and even carved wooden figures of European appearance have been found at Thule sites, suggesting trade or perhaps even salvage from abandoned Norse settlements or shipwrecks. Conversely, Thule artifacts, such as carved ivory pieces or sealskin scraps, have been discovered in Norse archaeological contexts. These findings hint at a period of coexistence and interaction, even if it was not always peaceful. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence for Thule-Norse interaction comes from a small, unassuming Thule site on Ellesmere Island, far to the west of the main Norse settlements in Greenland. Here, archaeologists unearthed a small, intricately carved wooden figure, Unmi. Stakeably European in appearance, complete with a hooded cloak and what appears to be a cross. This find, dated to the 13th or 14th century, speaks volumes about the movement of goods and ideas, even if the exact nature of its journey, whether through direct trade, as a gift, or perhaps even as a trophy, remains a mystery. The Norse sagas, written centuries later in Iceland, also provide a narrative, albeit a biased one, of encounters with the Skraelings. These accounts describe people who were small of stature and who fought with bows and arrows. While these sagas primarily detail encounters with indigenous peoples in what is now Newfoundland, during the brief Norse attempts to establish a settlement called Vinland around 1000 CE, they likely reflect the general Norse perception of the indigenous inhabitants of the North Atlantic. The sagas often portray these interactions as hostile, culminating in the Norse eventually abandoning their Vinland settlement due to the persistent conflict. In Greenland, the story was more prolonged, but perhaps equally fraught. Historians still debate the precise nature and extent of the interactions between the Norse and the Thule. Some scholars argue for a period of relatively peaceful coexistence and even trade, pointing to the archaeological evidence of exchanged goods. Others emphasize the sagas, accounts of conflict, and suggest that the two cultures largely avoided each other, or that encounters were primarily hostile. It is likely that both scenarios played out at different times and in different locations. The vastness of the landscape and the scattered nature of both populations would have meant that interactions were not uniform. The Thule, with their deep knowledge of the land and sea, were master hunters. Their ability to thrive in the harsh Arctic environment was unparalleled. They hunted whales, seals, walruses, and caribou, utilizing every part of the animal for food, clothing, tools, and shelter. Their semi-subterranean houses, insulated with sod and snow, were far more adapted to the Arctic winter than the Norse longhouses. The Norse, clinging to their European agricultural practices, struggled as the climate began to cool in the later medieval period, a phenomenon known as the Little Ice Age. This climatic shift had profound consequences. As the sea ice expanded and the growing season shortened, the Norse in Greenland faced increasing difficulties in sustaining their agricultural way of life. Their cattle and sheep struggled, and their ability to sail to Europe for supplies became more perilous. The Thule, however, were better equipped to adapt to these changing conditions. Their hunting techniques, particularly for large marine mammals, allowed them to thrive even as the environment grew harsher. The decline of the Norse settlements in Greenland is a somber tale, often intertwined with the presence of the Thule. By the early 15th century, the Norse settlements had vanished. The last written records from the Greenland Norse date to 1408, detailing a wedding in Havelsey Church. After that, silence. The reasons for their disappearance are complex and likely multifaceted. A cooling climate, a decline in trade with Europe, internal social stresses, and perhaps increased pressure or conflict with the Thule. Some theories suggest that the Thule, with their superior Arctic adaptations and perhaps a growing population, gradually outcompeted or even displaced the Norse. Imagine the Norse, weakened by dwindling resources and isolation, facing a people who were not only resilient but also expanding. The Thule's ability to hunt seals and whales from kayaks and umiaks, their use of dog sleds for overland travel, and their sophisticated clothing systems made them formidable inhabitants of the Arctic. However, a direct military conquest by the Thule over the Norse is not widely supported by archaeological evidence. It is more likely that the Norse settlements simply faded away, their population dwindling due to disease, starvation, or emigration back to Iceland or Europe, rather than being violently overthrown. The Thule may have simply absorbed or outlasted them, moving into areas that the Norse had once occupied as the Europeans retreated or perished. The legacy of these encounters, though often fleeting and sometimes contentious, shaped the course of history in the North Atlantic. For the Thule, the encounters with the Norse may have provided access to new materials like iron, which they quickly adapted into their own tool-making traditions. For the Norse, the Skraelings represented both a challenge and a mystery, a people whose way of life was utterly alien to their own. The Norse departure left the Thule and their descendants, the Inuit, as the undisputed masters of the vast Arctic lands and seas. Their culture, honed over millennia, had proven its resilience and adaptability. They had witnessed the arrival and eventual disappearance of a European civilization, a testament to the power of environmental forces and cultural adaptation. The longhouses of the Norse eventually crumbled, their stones reclaimed by the earth, their stories fading into the wind, while the Thule continued their journey, their traditions enduring, their kayaks still slicing through the icy waters. The memory of these encounters, though not always explicit, became woven into the fabric of Inuit oral traditions. Some Inuit stories speak of encounters with a people who were different, who lived in houses of stone and had strange customs. These tales, passed down through generations, are a precious link to a time when two worlds, so vastly different, briefly intersected in the remote, beautiful, and unforgiving Arctic. The land itself became a silent witness to these historical movements. The scattered ruins of Norse farms, overgrown with tundra grasses, lie close to the remnants of Thule winter houses, their entrance passages still discernible in the frozen ground. These sites, often windswept and remote, invite contemplation. One can almost hear the echoes of a distant past, the lowing of Norse cattle, the barking of Thule dogs, the rhythmic splash of a kayak paddle, the distant call of a hunter, the Norse saga of Greenland and Vinland, and their interactions with indigenous peoples also serves as a crucial prelude to later European explorations and colonizations. It was not the last time Europeans would venture into these northern lands, nor the last time they would encounter the indigenous inhabitants. But the Norse were the first, and their story, alongside that of the Thule, offers valuable insights into the dynamics of cultural contact, adaptation, and survival in one of the world's most extreme environments. The Thule, having navigated the vastness of the Arctic, having perfected their hunting techniques, and having encountered and outlasted the Norse, were now firmly established across the entire North American Arctic and Greenland. Their population, though never dense, was spread across an immense geographical area, connected by shared cultural practices, language, and an unparalleled understanding of their environment. They had adapted, innovated, and persevered. The stage was set for the next chapter in their long and extraordinary history, a history that would continue to unfold against the backdrop of an ever-changing world, but always rooted in the ice, the sea, and the enduring spirit of their people. The crisp, clean air that had for so long carried only the scent of salt and snow began to carry something new, something acrid and strange. The rhythmic slap of waves against ice was occasionally punctuated by the thrumming of distant engines, a sound utterly alien to the ancient Arctic soundscape. By the 17th century, and increasingly through the 18th and 19th, the distant sails that had once been mere specks on the horizon grew into towering ships, their hulls scarred by the ocean, their decks bustling with a different kind of hunter. These were the whalers, primarily European and American, drawn to the Arctic not by its furs or its spirit, but by its leviathans. The bowhead whale, a creature of immense power and gentle grace, had for millennia been a cornerstone of Inuit life. Its blubber provided fuel and food, its baleen fashioned into tools and implements, its bones used for shelter and art. The hunt was a sacred act, a testament to skill, patience, and respect for the natural world. But the whalers saw only profit. Whale oil lit the lamps of distant cities, lubricated the gears of burgeoning industries, and formed the base for countless products. Baleen, strong and flexible, was a precursor to plastic, shaping corsets and umbrella ribs for a fashionable world far removed from the icy expanse. Initially, the Inuit watched these newcomers with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Their massive ships, unlike anything seen before, could withstand the crushing ice, and their crews, often numbering in the dozens, brought with them a bewildering array of goods. Iron tools, far superior to bone or stone, were among the first and most coveted items. Knives that held an edge, axes that cleaved wood with ease, and pots that could withstand direct flame transformed daily tasks. Fabric, particularly canvas and sturdy wool, offered a welcome change from traditional animal hides, though it often lacked the same insulating properties. Tobacco, tea, and sugar, initially exotic treats, quickly became desired commodities, introducing new tastes and habits. The whalers, in turn, found the Inuit to be invaluable guides and skilled hunters. Their knowledge of the treacherous currents, the shifting ice, and the habits of marine mammals was unparalleled. Inuit men were often hired onto whaling crews, their expertise in harpooning and butchering proving immensely useful. This exchange, however, was far from equal. The whalers, with their superior technology and economic leverage, dictated the terms. What began as a cautious trade relationship soon morphed into a profound dependency. The traditional rhythm of Inuit life, once dictated by the seasons and the migratory patterns of animals, began to bend to the demands of the whaling season. Hunting for subsistence sometimes took a backseat to hunting for trade, as families sought to acquire the new goods that had become so desirable. The sheer scale of the whaling industry was staggering. By the mid-19th century, hundreds of ships plied the Arctic waters, particularly in the Davis Strait and Hudson Bay. The sound of exploding harpoons, a terrifying new noise, echoed across the silent fjords. The waters, once teeming with life, began to grow quieter. The bowhead whale population, slow to reproduce and easily targeted, plummeted dramatically. This decline had a devastating ripple effect on Inuit communities. Not only did it reduce a vital food source, but it also disrupted the delicate ecological balance, impacting other species that relied on the whales. One of the most profound and tragic consequences of contact with the whalers was the introduction of diseases against which the Inuit had no immunity. Smallpox, measles, influenza, and tuberculosis, common ailments in Europe and America, swept through isolated communities like wildfire. Entire villages were decimated, their populations reduced by half or more in a matter of months. The vivid descriptions of explorers and missionaries from the late 19th and early 20th centuries often speak of deserted settlements, silent tents, and the haunting evidence of sudden, widespread death. Historians still grapple with the precise mortality rates, as records were often incomplete or non-existent. But the consensus is that the impact was catastrophic, fundamentally altering the demographic landscape of the Arctic. Perhaps the silent snows themselves absorbed the grief of a people, watching their elders and children succumb to unseen enemies. The social fabric of Inuit society also underwent significant changes. The introduction of a wage economy, however sporadic, began to alter traditional roles and hierarchies. Men who worked on whaling ships gained a new kind of status, bringing back not just trade goods, but also stories of a world beyond the ice. The traditional sharing networks, so vital for survival in a harsh environment, were sometimes strained as individuals acquired personal wealth or goods that were not easily shared. While the core values of community and reciprocity remained strong, the seeds of individualism, a concept foreign to their communal way of life, were sown. The whalers also brought with them their own cultural norms and often their vices. Alcohol, previously unknown, became another commodity, leading to social problems in some communities. The presence of large numbers of foreign men, often isolated for months or years, also led to new social dynamics, including intermarriage and, unfortunately, instances of exploitation. The stories whispered around campfires began to include tales of these strange, loud men and their powerful ships, tales that were a mix of wonder, fear, and adaptation. As the 19th century drew to a close, the whaling industry began its slow decline. The invention of kerosene and the discovery of petroleum offered cheaper, more efficient alternatives to whale oil. The bowhead populations were severely depleted, making humps less profitable. The whalers, having plundered the Arctic's resources, gradually retreated, leaving behind a changed land and a changed people. The once bustling whaling stations, often temporary settlements built on shore, became ghost towns. Their weathered timbers, slowly reclaimed by the tundra, silent monuments to a bygone era of exploitation. The rusting hulks of abandoned ships, caught in the ice or beached on remote shores, became eerie reminders of their presence. Yet the legacy of the whaling era was not solely one of destruction and dependency. The Inuit, with their extraordinary resilience, adapted. They incorporated new tools and technologies into their lives, often adapting them in ingenious ways. The rifles acquired from whalers, for instance, revolutionized hunting, making it more efficient, though also contributing to the decline of some animal populations. The knowledge of navigation and the outside world gained from working on ships broadened their horizons. The very presence of these outsiders, for all their destructive impact, also solidified a sense of Inuit identity in contrast to the newcomers. It was a period of immense challenge, but also a testament to the enduring spirit of a people who had always found ways to thrive in the face of adversity. The exact number of whaling ships that operated in the Arctic at the peak of the industry is a subject of scholarly debate, with estimates ranging from hundreds to over 1,000, depending on the region and the specific time period. This ambiguity highlights the difficulty of reconstructing the full scope of an industry that operated in remote, often uncharted waters, with records that were frequently incomplete or lost to the sea. What is clear, however, is the immense pressure placed on the bowhead whale population. Some estimates suggest that over 90% of the bowhead population in certain regions was wiped out during the peak whaling years, a stark reminder of humanity's capacity for resource depletion. One lesser-known detail from D.'s era is the role of Inuit women in the whaling economy. While men often worked directly on the ships or as guides, women played a crucial role in processing the whale products on shore, particularly in rendering blubber into oil. They also engaged in trade, often exchanging intricately crafted furs, boots, and other items for desired European goods. This economic activity provided them with a degree of agency and influence within their communities, even as traditional gender roles were undergoing shifts. The intricate sewing skills passed down through generations were suddenly valuable in a new marketplace, allowing women to contribute significantly to their family's economic well-being in a changing world. The long shadows cast by the whaling ships stretched across generations. The communities that had once been self-sufficient, drawing everything they needed from the land and sea, now found themselves connected, often precariously, to a global economy. The desire for manufactured goods, once a novelty, became a necessity. The skills of traditional hunting, while still vital, were sometimes overshadowed by the need to earn money. This period marked a profound turning point, a bridge between an ancient way of life and the complexities of the modern world. The Arctic, once a realm of pristine isolation, had been irrevocably opened, its resources plundered, its people forever changed by the winds of distant industry. The silence that followed the whalers' departure was not the same silence that had preceded their arrival. It was a silence imbued with memory, with loss, and with the echoes of a world transformed. The land itself seemed to hold these stories. The wind whispering through the tundra grass, carrying tales of giant ships, strange men, and the tragic beauty of the great whales. The Inuit, however, did not merely endure. They continued to live, to adapt, to innovate, carrying forward the wisdom of their ancestors while navigating the uncharted waters of a new reality. The legacy of the whaling era became another layer in the rich tapestry of their history, a testament to their resilience and their unbreakable connection to the vast, beautiful, and often unforgiving Arctic. The rhythmic creak of wooden ships, once a rare and wondrous sound, grew more frequent along the icy coasts, heralding an era of profound and often painful transformation. The 18th and 19th centuries saw a slow but inexorable tide of European influence wash over the Arctic, not in a sudden deluge, but in persistent, lapping waves that gradually reshaped the shores of Inuit life. Whalers, their massive vessels cutting through the frigid waters, were among the earliest and most impactful of these new arrivals. They came for the blubber and baleen, resources that fueled the lamps and corsets of distant European cities, and in their pursuit they established temporary, then increasingly permanent, stations along the coast. These whaling stations, often bustling hubs of activity during the hunting season, offered the Inuit new goods, metal tools, firearms, textiles, and even alcohol that quickly integrated into their daily lives. The efficiency of a steel knife over a slate one or a rifle over a harpoon was undeniable, and a new dependency began to form. This exchange, however, was rarely equal. The whalers, driven by commercial imperatives, often exploited Inuit labor and resources, and inadvertently introduced diseases against which the Inuit had no immunity. Epidemics of measles, influenza, and tuberculosis swept through communities, devastating populations that had thrived for millennia in isolation. The sheer scale of these losses is difficult to fully comprehend, but archaeological evidence and oral histories speak of villages decimated, leaving behind only the silent echoes of once vibrant lives. As the 19th century drew to a close and the 20th century dawned, the focus of European powers shifted from mere resource extraction to a more formalized assertion of sovereignty. The vast, seemingly empty lands of the Arctic became subjects of national interest, carved up by distant governments in Ottawa, Copenhagen, and Washington. This geopolitical maneuvering, often conducted without any consultation or even awareness of the indigenous inhabitants, laid the groundwork for the establishment of administrative control. Trading posts, initially extensions of the whaling industry, evolved into more structured commercial enterprises. Most notably the Hudson's Bay Company, which established a widespread network across the Canadian Arctic. These posts became central points of interaction, where furs, particularly Arctic fox, were exchanged for manufactured goods, further cementing the Inuits' reliance on the outside world. The seasonal movements of hunting camps began to coalesce around these trading centers, subtly altering traditional nomadic patterns. The arrival of missionaries, often hand in hand with traders and administrators, represented another profound layer of colonial influence. Driven by a sincere, if often misguided, desire to civilize and save the indigenous populations, various Christian denominations, Anglican, Catholic, and Moravian, established missions across the Arctic. They brought with them not only a new religion, but also Western education, healthcare, and social norms. The missionaries learned Inuit languages, translated the Bible, and established schools, often teaching in English or Danish. While some aspects of their work, such as basic medical care, were welcomed, their primary goal was the conversion of souls, which often entailed a direct challenge to traditional Inuit spiritual beliefs and practices. The ancient animistic worldview, where spirits animated every aspect of the natural world and shamans served as intermediaries, was systematically undermined. Drum dancing, traditional songs, and the rich tapestry of oral storytelling were often discouraged, sometimes even forbidden as pagan practices. The missionaries introduced a linear concept of time, a singular god, and a moral code that often clashed with the communal and pragmatic ethics of Inuit society. Children, in particular, men a focus of missionary efforts as they were seen as more malleable and receptive to new teachings. Attending mission schools, they learned to read and write in foreign scripts and were exposed to a curriculum that often denigrated their own culture and history. This period also saw the deliberate efforts of colonial governments to assimilate Inuit populations into the dominant national cultures. In Canada, this policy manifested most starkly in the establishment of residential schools. Though the full scale of the residential school system's impact on Inuit communities came later in the 20th century, its origins lie in this earlier period of increasing control. Children were often forcibly removed from their families and communities, sometimes hundreds of miles away, to attend these institutions. The stated aim was to provide education and vocational training, but the underlying goal was cultural assimilation, to kill the Indian in the child, as a prominent Canadian official famously put it. In these schools, children were forbidden to speak their language, practice their traditions, or maintain connections with their families. The trauma inflicted by these institutions, from physical and emotional abuse to the loss of language and cultural identity, reverberates through Inuit communities to this day. The imposition of Western governance structures further eroded traditional forms of leadership and social organization. For millennia, Inuit society had been largely egalitarian, with decisions made through consensus and leadership emerging organically based on skill, wisdom, and experience. The colonial powers, however, introduced hierarchical systems, appointing local chiefs or headmen who often served as intermediaries for the administration rather than true representatives of their communities. This created new power dynamics and sometimes sowed division within communities, as traditional authority was bypassed or undermined. One particularly poignant example of cultural change during this era was the transformation of naming practices. Traditionally, Inuit names carried deep spiritual significance, often linking individuals to ancestors, animals, or specific characteristics. A child might be named after a recently deceased relative, believed to embody their spirit, or given a name that reflected a dream or a significant event. These names were central to identity and community connection. With the arrival of missionaries and administrators, however, pressure mounted to adopt Christian names or Western surnames. For administrative convenience, and sometimes out of a genuine belief that Inuit names were primitive or difficult, individuals were assigned European names, often losing the rich cultural context of their birth names. Later, in the mid-20th century, this administrative drive for identification would culminate in the infamous disc number system in Canada, where Inuit individuals were assigned metal tags with numbers, replacing their names entirely for official purposes, a stark symbol of dehumanization and colonial control. The introduction of a cash economy also profoundly altered traditional hunting and sharing practices. In a subsistence economy, food and resources were shared communally, ensuring the survival of the group. With the rise of the fur trade and the availability of manufactured goods, individual accumulation of wealth became possible, and the concept of private ownership began to seep into a society that had always prioritized collective well-being. While many traditional sharing networks persisted, the economic landscape shifted, creating new pressures and sometimes exacerbating existing social inequalities. Despite these immense pressures, Inuit culture proved remarkably resilient. While many adopted Christianity, often incorporating elements of their traditional spirituality into their new faith, the core values of community, respect for the land, and adaptability endured. Stories, though sometimes told in hushed tones, continued to be passed down. The skills of hunting, sowing, and survival, though augmented by new technologies, remained essential. However, the cumulative effect of these changes was undeniable. By the mid-20th century, the Inuit were no longer living in relative isolation, but were deeply enmeshed in a global system that had fundamentally reshaped their world. The pristine, self-sufficient societies that had navigated the Arctic for millennia now faced challenges on an unprecedented scale, struggling to reconcile their ancient heritage with the demands of a rapidly changing modern world. Historians still debate the precise extent to which these changes were forced versus adopted. While the overarching narrative is one of colonial imposition, the interaction was often complex. Did the Inuit embrace new technologies and goods out of genuine desire for efficiency and comfort, or out of necessity, as traditional resources became scarcer due to commercial hunting by outsiders? Was the adoption of Christianity a sincere spiritual conversion for many, or a pragmatic choice to align with the powerful newcomers and gain access to their resources and influence? The truth likely lies in a nuanced blend of both, varying from community to community and individual to individual. The choice, if it could even be called that, was rarely made on equal terms, as the power imbalance between the technologically advanced, resource-hungry colonizers and the indigenous inhabitants was immense. The long-term consequences of this era continue to unfold. The loss of language, the intergenerational trauma from residential schools, the erosion of traditional governance, and the challenges of adapting to a wage economy are all direct legacies of this period. Yet, within this narrative of disruption, there is also a story of enduring strength and cultural survival. The seeds of self-determination, though dormant for a time, were always present, waiting for the opportunity to re-emerge and reclaim the vibrant heritage that had been so profoundly tested. The Arctic, once perceived as an empty frontier, was in fact a homeland, teeming with life and culture, now navigating the complex currents of a world forever altered by the arrival of distant ships and the ideas they carried. The winds of change, often cold and unforgiving in the Arctic, began to carry a new kind of chill in the mid-20th century. It was a chill not born of ice and snow, but of policy and power, emanating from distant southern capitals. The Inuit, who had for millennia adapted to every nuance of their environment, now faced a challenge of a different order, the heavy hand of government intervention. As the world shifted into a new geopolitical era, marked by the Cold War and burgeoning nation-states, the Canadian government began to look northward with a renewed and often misguided sense of purpose. In the 1950s, a policy known as the High Arctic Relocation unfolded, a chapter in Inuit history that remains deeply painful and controversial. The official rationale, as presented by the Canadian government, was twofold: to assert Canadian sovereignty over its vast northern territories, particularly in the face of perceived American encroachment during the Cold War, and to improve the living conditions of the Inuit, who were then seen as struggling in isolated camps. The government claimed that the relocated families were volunteers seeking a better life, but the reality on the ground was far more complex and coercive. In 1953, several Inuit families from Inukjuak, then known as Port Harrison in northern Quebec, and a few from Pond Inlet on Baffin Island were persuaded to move over 1,200 miles north to the desolate high Arctic islands of Grise Fiord on Ellesmere Island and Resolute Bay on Cornwallis Island. The promise was of abundant wildlife, caribou, polar bears, and seals, and a new beginning. They were told they would find better housing, schools, and healthcare. Yet when they arrived, often after long and arduous journeys by icebreaker, what greeted them was a stark, unforgiving landscape, utterly alien to their experience. The promised housing was non-existent, replaced by canvas tents, and the wildlife, while present, was different in its patterns and habits from what they knew. The sun, which in their home communities dipped below the horizon for a few months, here disappeared for nearly 4 months of continuous darkness, a profound psychological shock. The families from Inukjuak, accustomed to the relatively milder climate of northern Quebec, found themselves in an environment that was geographically and ecologically distinct. The hunting grounds they knew, the migratory paths of the animals, the very texture of the snow and ice, all were different. Their traditional knowledge, honed over generations for their specific region, was suddenly less effective, leaving them vulnerable. The government representatives, often Royal Canadian Mounted Police officers who accompanied them, were largely unfamiliar with Inuit culture and the harsh realities of high Arctic survival. They were administrators, not Arctic navigators or hunters. The relocation was, in many ways, an experiment in human adaptation, conducted without the informed consent that modern ethics would demand. The Inuit were not given a clear understanding of the permanent nature of the move, nor were they adequately prepared for the extreme conditions they would face. They were left with minimal supplies and expected to thrive. The first years were a struggle for survival, marked by hardship, hunger, and a deep sense of betrayal. Many children died due to the harsh conditions and lack of adequate medical care. One of the lesser-known details of this period is the profound psychological impact of the continuous darkness, known as the polar night, on those accustomed to the cyclical light of more southerly Arctic regions. It contributed to a deep sense of disorientation and melancholy, far beyond simple homesickness. The government's primary motivation, asserting sovereignty, was a Cold War imperative. The vast, empty spaces of the high Arctic were seen as vulnerable to claims from other nations, particularly the United States, which had established military bases in the Canadian Arctic. By placing Inuit families in these remote outposts, Canada could demonstrate effective occupation and use of the land. This policy, therefore, instrumentalized the Inuit, using them as human flagpoles to mark Canadian territory. This aspect of the relocation highlights a recurring theme in the history of Indigenous peoples, their lands and lives often becoming pawns in larger geopolitical games. Over the subsequent decades, government policies continued to reshape Inuit life, often with devastating consequences. The establishment of permanent settlements, driven by a desire to provide social services like schools and healthcare, inadvertently led to the erosion of traditional nomadic hunting lifestyles. Before the 1950s and 60s, many Inuit still lived in seasonal camps, following the migration of game animals. The government, however, viewed this as a primitive and inefficient way of life. They encouraged and sometimes coerced Inuit families to move into centralized communities. This was often done by making access to essential services like medical care or family allowances conditional on living in a settlement. This shift had profound impacts. Traditional hunting grounds became inaccessible, leading to a decline in subsistence hunting and a growing reliance on store-bought food, which was often expensive and less nutritious. The concentration of people in settlements also created new social problems, including overcrowding, sanitation issues, and the spread of diseases. The close-knit social structures of camp life, where knowledge and skills were passed down directly through generations in the context of daily survival, began to fray. Children were sent to residential schools, often far from their homes, where they were forbidden to speak their language and practice their culture, further severing the links to their heritage. The residential school system, which operated in Canada from the late 19th century until the late 20th century, was particularly damaging. For Inuit children, it meant being taken from their families, sometimes by force, and placed in institutions run by churches and the government. The stated goal was to assimilate Indigenous children into mainstream Canadian society, to kill the Indian in the child. In these schools, children experienced widespread physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. They were taught to be ashamed of their language, their spirituality, and their very identity. The trauma inflicted in these schools echoed through generations, contributing to intergenerational trauma, mental health crises, and the loss of language and cultural practices that persist to this day. The last residential school in Canada closed in 1996, but its legacy continues to be felt deeply within Inuit communities. Another significant policy was the introduction of disc numbers. From the 1940s to the 1970s, the Canadian government assigned identification numbers, embossed on small leather or plastic discs, to Inuit individuals. These numbers were intended to replace traditional names, which were seen as difficult for non-Inuit administrators to pronounce or record. For many Inuit, their disc number became their primary identifier in official records, replacing their given names. This dehumanizing practice stripped individuals of their personal identity, reducing them to a bureaucratic code. It was a stark symbol of the government's paternalistic view of the Inuit, treating them as subjects to be managed rather than as citizens with inherent rights and dignity. Imagine a world where your very name, the sound that defines you, is replaced by a sequence of digits. It's a subtle but profound erasure of self. The impact of these policies, the high Arctic relocation, the forced settlement, the residential schools, and the disc numbers, was not merely economic or social. It was profoundly cultural and spiritual. The Inuit worldview, deeply intertwined with the land, the animals, and the cycle, essences of nature, was disrupted. Their traditional governance structures, their spiritual practices, and their intricate knowledge systems were undermined. The sense of self-sufficiency and pride, honed over millennia of thriving in the harshest environment on Earth, was eroded by dependence on government handouts and southern institutions. Historians still debate the extent to which the Canadian government genuinely believed these policies were for the benefit of the Inuit, versus the degree to which they were primarily driven by self-serving national interests like sovereignty and resource extraction. While some officials might have held benevolent intentions, believing they were bringing progress to the Inuit, the methods employed and the disregard for Inuit self-determination speak volumes. The lack of consultation, the forced nature of many changes, and the subsequent failure to address the harms caused strongly suggest that Inuit well-being was secondary to other agendas. The government's official apology for the high Arctic relocation in 2010 acknowledged the suffering and recognized the profound wrong committed, a significant step, but one that came decades after the initial trauma. The resilience of the Inuit, however, is a testament to their enduring spirit. Despite these immense challenges, they have fought to preserve their language, their culture, and their identity. The late 20th and early 21st centuries have seen a resurgence of Inuit self-determination. The creation of Nunavut in 1999, a vast territory governed by Inuit for Inuit, stands as a monumental achievement. It was the culmination of decades of political struggle and negotiation, a testament to the unwavering commitment of Inuit leaders and communities to reclaim control over their lands and their future. Nunavut, meaning our land, in Inuktitut, encompasses a significant portion of the Canadian Arctic, covering an area roughly the size of Western Europe. Its establishment marked a new era of self-governance, allowing Inuit to shape their own policies in areas such as education, healthcare, and resource management, grounded in their own cultural values and priorities. The capital, Iqaluit, bustles with a unique blend of traditional and modern life, where Inuktitut is an official language. And Inuit art and culture are celebrated. Yet the legacy of past policies continues to cast a long shadow. Communities in Nunavut still grapple with high rates of poverty, food insecurity, and mental health challenges, issues directly linked to the historical disruptions of their way of life. The struggle to revitalize language, heal from intergenerational trauma, and build strong, self-sufficient communities remains an ongoing endeavor. The journey from forced relocation and assimilation to self-determination is a long and arduous one, but it is a journey the Inuit are undertaking with courage and unwavering determination. The story of the high Arctic relocation and other government policies serves as a powerful reminder of the profound impact that distant decisions can have on the lives of people, particularly Indigenous peoples, whose voices are often marginalized. It underscores the importance of listening, of understanding, and of respecting the deep connection between a people and their land. The Arctic, once seen by some as an empty frontier to be exploited or controlled, is in fact a vibrant homeland, teeming with life and history, cared for by a people whose resilience has been tested by both the formidable forces of nature and the often unwitting forces of human governance. The whispers of the wind across the frozen tundra still carry the echoes of those difficult times, but they also carry the growing chorus of a people reclaiming their voice and shaping their own destiny. The echoes of the Second World War, though distant in the vastness of the Arctic, reverberated through Inuit communities with an unexpected force, ushering in an era of profound and irreversible change. The war had accelerated technological advancements, spurred global connectivity, and perhaps most significantly for the Inuit, intensified the world's interest in the strategic importance of the Arctic. Suddenly, this once remote realm was a crucial frontier, a potential battleground, and a repository of untapped resources. This newfound attention brought with it a wave of modernization that would fundamentally reshape Inuit life, pulling them from their ancient nomadic rhythms into a world of settled communities, wage economies, and formal education. The post-war period saw an unprecedented influx of Southern influence. Military installations, weather stations, and radar sites, part of the Distant Early Warning (DEW) line system established in the 1950s by the United States and Canada to detect Soviet bombers, sprang up across the Arctic landscape. These imposing structures, with their towering antennas and humming generators, were beacons of a different way of life. They brought jobs, albeit often low-paying ones, for Inuit men, introducing them to the concept of a regular wage and a fixed work schedule, a stark contrast to the seasonal cycles of hunting and trapping. With these jobs came new goods, processed foods, manufactured clothing, tools, and even rudimentary forms of entertainment like radios. The allure of these conveniences, coupled with the increasing difficulty of sustaining a purely subsistence lifestyle in a changing world, began to draw families away from their scattered camps towards these burgeoning settlements. This process of sedentarization, the shift from a nomadic or semi-nomadic existence to a settled one, was not always a gentle transition. Government policies, often well-intentioned but sometimes culturally insensitive, actively encouraged or even mandated this move. In Canada, for instance, the federal government began to establish permanent settlements, building houses, schools, and nursing stations in central locations. The rationale was clear. It was easier and more cost-effective to deliver social services like healthcare and education to concentrated populations. For many Inuit families, the promise of medical care, especially for their children, and the opportunity for their children to receive an education was a powerful draw. The memory of devastating epidemics, like the tuberculosis outbreaks that swept through the Arctic in the mid-20th century, was still fresh, and the hope for a healthier future for their offspring was a compelling force. Yet this move to permanent settlements came at a cost. The intimate connection to the land, honed over millennia, began to fray. Hunting grounds were no longer just outside the door. They required travel, often by snowmobile or boat, which in turn required fuel and maintenance, further embedding families into the wage economy. Traditional knowledge, once passed down through direct experience on the land, became less immediately relevant in a village setting. Elders, who had once been the repositories of vital survival skills and navigational wisdom, found their roles subtly diminished as new forms of knowledge, taught in schools and delivered by Southern administrators, gained prominence. The introduction of a formal education system was perhaps one of the most profound changes. For generations, Inuit children learned by doing, by observing, and by participating in the daily rhythms of their families and communities. Their classroom was the vast tundra, their lessons the hunt, the craft of tool-making, and the intricate knowledge of animal behavior and weather patterns. Now children were expected to attend schools, often taught in English or French by non-Inuit teachers. While these schools offered literacy and numeracy, opening doors to the South in world, they often did so at the expense of traditional language and culture. Children were sometimes discouraged from speaking Inuktitut in school, and the curriculum rarely reflected Inuit history, values, or perspectives. This created a growing cultural chasm between generations, as younger Inuit became more fluent in Southern ways, sometimes at the expense of their ancestral heritage. The wage economy, while offering new opportunities, also brought new challenges. For a people accustomed to a communal sharing system where resources were distributed based on need, the concept of individual ownership and accumulation of wealth was a significant shift. Money, once a foreign concept, became a necessity for survival. This led to a reliance on store-bought goods, often expensive due to transportation costs, and a vulnerability to economic downturns. When jobs were scarce, bottom line, or when traditional hunting and trapping economies faltered due to fluctuating fur prices or environmental changes, communities faced hardship. The traditional safety nets of extended family and communal sharing were still present, but they were stretched thin by the new economic realities. One lesser-known detail from this period is the role of government-sponsored craft programs. Recognizing the potential for Inuit art to generate income and preserve cultural identity, programs were established in the 1950s and 60s to encourage carving, printmaking, and textile arts. Artists like Kenajuak Ashevak, whose iconic print, The Enchanted Owl, became a symbol of Inuit art, gained international recognition. These programs not only provided a source of income for many families, but also offered a powerful means of cultural expression and a way to share Inuit stories and worldviews with a global audience. Yet even these programs were not without their complexities, as Southern art dealers and administrators often played a significant role in shaping the aesthetics and marketing of Inuit art, sometimes leading to debates about authenticity and artistic control. The transition to settled life also brought new social challenges. Overcrowding in poorly constructed housing, a lack of adequate sanitation, and the stress of adapting to a radically different lifestyle contributed to health issues, including increased rates of respiratory illnesses and mental health struggles. Alcohol, once largely absent from Inuit communities, became a significant problem as it was introduced and became more accessible in settlements, sometimes exacerbating existing social tensions and contributing to family breakdown. The shift from a life of constant physical activity and direct engagement with the land to a more sedentary existence also had health implications, leading to changes in diet and an increase in chronic diseases. Historians still debate the extent to which these changes were a result of deliberate assimilationist policies versus the unintended consequences of well-meaning but ultimately flawed attempts at progress. Some argue that the Canadian government, for example, actively sought to integrate Inuit into mainstream Canadian society, believing it was the best path to their well-being, even if it meant sacrificing traditional ways. Others contend that the government was simply responding to the practical challenges of administering services to a dispersed population, and that the cultural shifts were an unavoidable byproduct of modernization. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, a complex interplay of policy, circumstance, and the irresistible pull of a rapidly changing world. Despite these immense challenges, the Inuit demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability. They embraced new technologies, learning to operate snowmobiles, outboard motors, and even airplanes. They found ways to integrate elements of the New World into their traditional practices, using rifles for hunting and modern tools for crafting. They also began to assert their political voice, recognizing the need to advocate for their rights and self-determination in this new landscape. The 1970s would see the nascent stirrings of a powerful political movement, as Inuit leaders began to organize and demand greater control over their lands, their resources, and their future. The era of rapid modernization, while disruptive, also laid the groundwork for a new chapter of self-governance and cultural revitalization. A testament to the enduring spirit of a people who had weathered change for millennia. The winds of the Arctic, though still cold and fierce, now carried the whispers of both ancient traditions and a rapidly approaching future. The chill winds of change, which had for so long swept across the Arctic, began to carry a new sound in the mid-20th century. The collective voice of the Inuit, rising with a quiet yet undeniable power. For centuries, their existence had been defined by adaptation, resilience, and a profound connection to their ancestral lands. Now, as the world shrank and external influences grew stronger, a new form of adaptation was needed. One rooted in political action and the assertion of self-determination. The post-war era brought increased government presence to the Arctic, ostensibly for the betterment of Inuit communities, but often with unintended and sometimes detrimental consequences. Centralized settlements, though offering access to services like schools and healthcare, disrupted traditional nomadic patterns and concentrated populations in ways that strained resources and social structures. Education, while a valuable tool, often came at the cost of cultural immersion, as children were sometimes sent away to residential schools, where their language and customs were actively suppressed. The very fabric of Inuit society, so intricately woven with the land and its seasonal rhythms, felt the strain of these imposed changes. Yet from these challenges emerged a new resolve. The 1960s, a decade of global social upheaval and civil rights movements, resonated even in the remote reaches of the Arctic. Inuit leaders, many of whom had experienced the complexities of life both on the land and within the burgeoning modern world, began to articulate a clear vision for their people's future. They recognized that true progress could only come from within, through their own governance and stewardship of their heritage. One of the earliest and most pivotal expressions of this burgeoning political consciousness was the establishment of the Inuit Taperisat of Canada, ITC, in 1971. This organization, whose name translates to Inuit Brotherhood of Canada, marked a watershed moment. It was the first national political body created by Inuit for Inuit, and its formation signaled a unified front in addressing the challenges they faced. ITC's initial mandate was broad, encompassing everything from cultural preservation to economic development, but at its heart was the urgent need to address land claims. For generations, Inuit had occupied and used vast territories across the Arctic. Their rights to these lands implicitly understood through their continuous presence and traditional practices. However, from a legal perspective, these rights were largely unrecognized by the Canadian government. As resource exploration, particularly for oil and gas, began to cast its gaze northward, the urgency of securing formal land titles became paramount. Without them, Inuit feared losing control over their ancestral territories and the resources they contained, risking further erosion of their way of life. The concept of land claims was complex, encompassing not just ownership of the land itself, but also rights to hunt, fish, trap, and gather, as well as subsurface mineral rights. It was a negotiation not just about property, but about sovereignty and self-governance. The ITC, under the leadership of figures like Tagak Curley and later John Amagowalik, embarked on the monumental task of articulating these claims, gathering evidence, and engaging in protracted negotiations with the federal government. This was a battle fought not with spears and bows, but with legal documents, maps, and the unwavering conviction of a people determined to reclaim their destiny. Simultaneously, the movement for cultural preservation gained momentum. The threat of assimilation, though perhaps not always intentional, was palpable. The Inuit language, the very soul of Inuit identity, was at risk as English and French became dominant in schools and media. Elders, the living repositories of oral history and traditional knowledge, saw their wisdom slowly being overshadowed. Efforts were launched to record stories, songs, and traditional skills, to establish cultural centers, and to advocate for Inuktitut language instruction in schools. These initiatives were not merely nostalgic. They were seen as essential for the mental, spiritual, and social well-being of future generations. The very act of speaking Inuktitut, of telling an ancient story, became an act of defiance and affirmation. One fascinating, yet lesser-known, aspect of this cultural resurgence was the re-emphasis on traditional games and sports. While often seen as mere recreation, these activities, such as the high kick, the 1-foot high kick, and various strength and endurance challenges, were deeply intertwined with survival skills and community bonding. Their revival helped to instill pride, discipline, and a connection to ancestral physical prowess, offering a tangible link to the past in a rapidly changing world. These games, often performed during community gatherings, served as powerful reminders of Inuit strength and ingenuity. The path to self-determination was not without its internal debates and external challenges. Historians still disagree on the precise balance of influence between internal Inuit leadership and external legal and political advisors in shaping the land claims process. Was it primarily an organic movement driven from within communities? Or was it significantly guided by non-Inuit legal frameworks and strategies? The truth likely lies in a complex interplay of both, a testament to the adaptive nature of the Inuit and their ability to leverage diverse expertise to achieve their goals. The negotiations for land claims were long and arduous, spanning decades. They involved countless meetings, presentations, and legal arguments. There were moments of frustration, breakthroughs, and setbacks. Yet, the resolve of the Inuit leadership remained steadfast. They understood that what they were fighting for was not just land, but the right to define their own future, to govern themselves according to their own values and priorities. A significant milestone on this journey was the signing of the James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement in 1975. While primarily involving Cree and Naskapi nations, it set a precedent for comprehensive land claims agreements in Canada, demonstrating that such large-scale negotiations were indeed possible. This agreement, though not directly involving the Inuit of the Central and Eastern Arctic, provided a valuable template and a psychological boost, showing that the Canadian government was willing to negotiate on these complex issues. The vision for a new territory, a self-governing Inuit homeland, began to coalesce. The idea of Nunavut, meaning our land in Inuktitut, emerged as a powerful symbol of this aspiration. It was not merely about creating a new administrative unit. It was about establishing a jurisdiction where Inuit culture, language, and governance principles would be paramount. The creation of Nunavut was seen as the ultimate expression of self-determination, a chance to build a society that reflected Inuit values and priorities from the ground up. The final agreement for the creation of Nunavut was signed in 1993, a culmination of over 2 decades of tireless effort. This landmark agreement, known as the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement, was the largest Indigenous land claim settlement in Canadian history. It granted the Inuit of the Eastern Arctic title to 350,000 square kilometers of land, including subsurface mineral rights to a significant portion. More importantly, it laid the groundwork for the establishment of the new territory of Nunavut. On April 1, 1999, Nunavut officially came into being, a moment of profound joy and historical significance for the Inuit. The creation of Nunavut was not just a redrawing of maps. It was the birth of a new political entity, a testament to the resilience, vision, and unwavering determination of the Inuit people. It provided a legislative assembly, a public government, and a framework for Inuit to manage their own affairs, from education and healthcare to resource development and cultural preservation. The establishment of Nunavut represented a triumph of activism and negotiation, a peaceful revolution that reshaped the political landscape of Canada. It was a powerful demonstration that Indigenous peoples could achieve self-determination within a modern nation-state, asserting their inherent rights while contributing to the larger national fabric. Yet the journey did not end with the creation of Nunavut. The challenges of building a new government, developing a sustainable economy in a harsh environment, and addressing ongoing social issues remained. The legacy of colonialism, though confronted and partially overcome, continued to cast a long shadow. Issues such as food security, housing shortages, and the intergenerational trauma of residential schools required ongoing attention and innovative solutions. The story of Inuit activism and the fight for self-determination is a testament to the enduring human spirit. It is a narrative of a people who, despite immense pressures, refuse to surrender their identity or their connection to their ancestral lands. It is a story told in the quiet determination of elders, the passionate advocacy of leaders, and the hopeful eyes of children learning Inuktitut in their own schools. Today, Nunavut stands as a vibrant, living example of Indigenous self-governance. Its capital, Iqaluit, bustles with activity, a blend of traditional and modern life. The Legislative Assembly, with its Inuktitut-speaking members, makes decisions that directly impact the lives of its citizens. Cultural initiatives flourish, ensuring that the rich heritage of the Inuit is passed down through generations. Artists continue to create stunning works that speak to their deep connection to the land and their unique worldview. The creation of Nunavut also sparked further discussions and inspired other Indigenous groups across Canada and around the world in their own struggles for recognition and self-determination. It demonstrated that dialogue, negotiation, and sustained political action could lead to transformative change, fostering a more just and equitable relationship between Indigenous peoples and settler societies. The winds still sweep across the Arctic, but now they carry not only the echoes of ancient hunting songs, but also the vibrant sounds of a self-governing people, charting their own course. The stars, which have guided Inuit navigators for millennia, now perhaps look down upon a landscape where the dreams of self-determination have taken root and continue to grow. Nurtured by resilience, vision, and an unwavering love for Nunavut, our land, the story of the Inuit, ever evolving, continues to unfold, a testament to their enduring strength and their profound connection to the vast, beautiful, and challenging Arctic world they call home. The Arctic winds, though still biting, carried a different kind of promise as the 20th century drew to a close. For generations, the Inuit had navigated the vast icy expanse, their lives inextricably linked to the land and sea. But the geopolitical landscape of the North was shifting, and with it, the aspirations of a people who had long sought greater self-determination. The idea of a distinct Inuit territory, a homeland governed by its own people, began to coalesce with unprecedented clarity. This wasn't a sudden awakening, but the culmination of decades of advocacy, resilience, and a steadfast commitment to cultural survival. The seeds of modern Inuit governance were sown in the mid-20th century, as the Canadian government began to assert greater control over the North. This period saw the establishment of permanent settlements, the introduction of Southern-style education and healthcare, and a growing awareness among Inuit leaders of the need to protect their rights and way of life. Organizations like the Inuit Tapestry of Canada, founded in 1971, emerged as powerful voices, advocating for land claims, cultural preservation, and political autonomy. These early movements, often spearheaded by individuals who had experienced firsthand the challenges of assimilation, laid the groundwork for a truly transformative vision. The concept of Nunavut, meaning our land in Inuktitut, was not simply about drawing lines on a map. It was about reclaiming a narrative, asserting a distinct identity, and building a future rooted in Inuit values. The dream of Nunavut gained significant momentum in the 1970s and 80s, fueled by a growing sense of national pride and a desire to address the social and economic disparities that plagued many northern communities. The negotiations were protracted and complex, involving the Canadian government, the government of the Northwest Territories, and Inuit representatives. It was a delicate dance between legal frameworks, political will, and the deep-seated aspirations of a people. One of the key figures in this movement was John Amagorlik, often referred to as the father of Nunavut. His tireless advocacy, strategic vision, and unwavering commitment to the cause were instrumental in navigating the intricate political landscape. Amagorlik, along with many other dedicated Inuit leaders, understood that true self-determination required not just land, but also the authority to govern it, to shape its laws, and to foster its unique cultural heritage. The Land Claims Agreement, signed in 1993, was a monumental achievement, granting the Inuit ownership of 350,000 square kilometers of land and significant rights over resource development across a much larger area. This agreement, known as the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement, was the largest Aboriginal land claim settlement in Canadian history, a testament to the perseverance of the Inuit people. The creation of Nunavut on April 1, 1999, was a moment of profound historical significance, not just for the Inuit, but for Canada and the world. It marked the first major redrawing of the Canadian map since the entry of Newfoundland in 1949. Suddenly, a new territory, spanning over 2 million square kilometres, roughly 1/5 of Canada's landmass, appeared, governed by a largely Inuit population. The capital, Iqaluit, a vibrant hub nestled on Baffin Island, became the administrative and cultural heart of this new entity. The establishment of Nunavut was a bold experiment in nation-building, an attempt to fuse ancient traditions with modern democratic principles. The challenges facing the nascent government were immense. Building a new territory from the ground up required establishing a legislative assembly, a public service, and a comprehensive legal system, all while navigating the unique cultural and linguistic landscape of the North. The official languages of Nunavut are Inuktitut, Inuinnaqtun, English, and French, a reflection of its diverse heritage and a commitment to preserving Indigenous languages. The government adopted a consensus-based model where members of the Legislative Assembly are elected as individuals rather than as representatives of political parties. This approach, rooted in traditional Inuit decision-making processes, aimed to foster collaboration and prioritize the collective good over partisan interests. Historians still debate the long-term effectiveness of this consensus government model in addressing the complex socio-economic issues facing Nunavut, with some arguing it can lead to a lack of accountability, while others praise its ability to transcend political divides. One of the most pressing issues was the development of a public service that reflected the population it served. The goal was to have a workforce that was at least 85% Inuit, a target that proved difficult to achieve in the early years due to a shortage of trained professionals and the legacy of educational disparities. The government invested heavily in education and training programs, recognizing that a strong, skilled workforce was essential for self-sufficiency and effective governance. This commitment to capacity building was not just about jobs. It was about empowering Inuit individuals to lead and shape their own future. The development of a distinct Nunavut legal system also presented unique complexities. While Canadian common law forms the foundation, there was a strong desire to incorporate Inuit customary law and traditional justice principles. This involved exploring ways to integrate community-based justice initiatives, restorative justice practices, and a deeper understanding of Inuit societal norms into the formal legal framework. The aim was to create a system that was not only fair and equitable, but also culturally relevant and accessible to all Nunavummiut. This ongoing effort to blend legal traditions is a fascinating example of legal pluralism in action. Economically, Nunavut faces significant hurdles. Its vast size and sparse population mean high transportation costs, limited infrastructure, and a heavy reliance on government funding. The traditional Inuit economy, based on hunting, fishing, and trapping, continues to be important for many communities, providing food security and cultural continuity. However, the modern economy is increasingly driven by resource extraction, particularly mining and a growing tourism sector. Balancing these industries with environmental protection and sustainable development is a constant challenge. The potential for diamond, gold, and iron ore mining offers significant economic opportunities, but also raises concerns about environmental impact and the equitable distribution of benefits. The social fabric of Nunavut is also undergoing profound transformations. While the creation of the territory brought immense hope and pride, it did not erase the legacy of colonialism overnight. Issues such as intergenerational trauma, high rates of suicide, food insecurity, and inadequate housing continue to be significant concerns. The government of Nunavut, alongside various community organizations, is working tirelessly to address these challenges through culturally appropriate programs and services. For instance, initiatives focused on language revitalization, mental health support, and youth engagement are crucial for fostering well-being and strengthening community bonds. One lesser-known detail about Nunavut's governance is the role of the Nunavut Planning Commission. This independent body is responsible for land use planning throughout the territory, a critical function given the vastness of the land and the competing interests of resource development, environmental protection, and traditional land use. The Commission's work involves extensive community consultation, ensuring that the voices of local residents are heard in decisions that affect their land and future. This collaborative approach to land management is a hallmark of Inuit governance, reflecting a deep respect for the environment and the wisdom of generations. The ongoing effort to balance tradition with contemporary life is perhaps the most defining characteristic of modern Inuit governance. The elders, the knowledge keepers, play a vital role in guiding the younger generations, sharing stories, traditional skills, and ethical frameworks. At the same time, young Inuit leaders are embracing modern education, technology, and global perspectives, bringing new ideas and approaches to governance and community development. This intergenerational dialogue is essential for ensuring that Nunavut evolves in a way that is both progressive and deeply rooted in its cultural heritage. The establishment of Nunavut was not the end of a journey, but the beginning of a new chapter in Inuit history. It is a living, breathing experiment in self-determination, a testament to the enduring spirit of a people who have thrived in one of the world's harshest environments. The challenges are many, but so too are the opportunities. As the Arctic continues to change, both environmentally and politically, the Inuit of Nunavut stand at the forefront, charting a course for their future, guided by the wisdom of their ancestors and the promise of a self-governed homeland. Perhaps the aurora borealis, dancing across the northern sky, whispers encouragement to these modern nation builders, reminding them of the strength and resilience embedded in their very land. The relentless march of time, which had once brought the Thule across Beringia and into the vastness of the Arctic, now brought with it a new, more insidious challenge: a warming world. The delicate balance of ice and ocean, of land and life, that had sustained Inuit culture for millennia, began to shift at an unprecedented pace. The very foundations of their existence, sculpted by cold and ice, were now threatened by heat. The early 21st century saw the Arctic warming at twice the rate of the rest of the planet. This wasn't merely a statistic to the Inuit. It was a lived reality, a daily alteration of their ancestral home. Elders spoke of thinner ice, unpredictable weather patterns, and changes in animal migrations that defied generations of accumulated wisdom. The ancient knowledge, passed down through countless winters, suddenly found itself grappling with a future unlike any past. Sea ice, the lifeblood of Inuit travel and hunting, became less reliable. Winter hunting grounds, once accessible by snowmobile or dog team across solid ice, were now treacherous expanses of slush and open water. The traditional spring hunt for seals, dependent on stable ice flows, grew increasingly difficult and dangerous. Hunters, once masters of their environment, found themselves navigating a landscape in flux, where familiar landmarks could vanish overnight with a sudden thaw. The permafrost, the permanently frozen ground that had supported their homes and preserved their ancestors, began to thaw. Houses buckled, roads cracked, ancient archaeological sites, once locked in ice, became vulnerable to erosion and decay. Coastal communities, many of them centuries old, faced the grim prospect of relocation as rising sea levels and increased storm surges gnawed at their shores. The village of Shishmaref, in Alaska, for instance, has been considering relocation for decades due to severe erosion, a direct consequence of diminishing sea ice no longer protecting its coast. The animals, too, felt the profound impact. Polar bears, iconic symbols of the Arctic, struggled to find seals as their hunting platforms of sea ice retreated. Ringed seals, a primary food source for both bears and Inuit, faced challenges in pupping and raising their young on increasingly unstable ice. Caribou migrations were disrupted by changes in vegetation and snow cover, impacting the subsistence hunting that was vital to many inland communities. Even the fish in the oceans, from Arctic char to cod, showed signs of stress as water temperatures rose and ocean acidification began to take its toll. Yet, even as their world transformed around them, the Inuit did not cede to despair. Instead, they rose to meet this existential threat with the same resilience and adaptability that had defined their history. They recognized that the changes they were witnessing were not isolated to their homeland, but were symptoms of a global phenomenon. And so, they began to speak, not just for themselves, but for the planet. Inuit leaders, elders, and youth emerged as powerful voices on the international stage. They brought their first-hand experiences, their traditional knowledge, and their profound connection to the land to global forums, from United Nations climate summits to Arctic Council meetings. Sheila Watt-Cloutier, an Inuit leader from Nunavut, became a prominent advocate for linking human rights to climate change, arguing eloquently that the loss of ice was not just an environmental issue, but a profound violation of the cultural and subsistence rights of Indigenous peoples. Her book, The Right to be Cold, articulated this perspective with compelling clarity, resonating with audiences worldwide. The Arctic Council, an intergovernmental forum promoting cooperation, coordination, and interaction among the Arctic states, became a crucial platform for Inuit advocacy. Permanent participants, representing Indigenous groups like the Inuit Circumpolar Council, ICC, ensured that News voices were heard at the highest levels of Arctic governance. The ICC, founded in 1977, actively works to represent the 180,000 Inuit across Alaska, Canada, Greenland, and Chukotka, Russia, advocating for their rights and interests, particularly concerning environmental protection and sustainable development. Their presence ensured that policy discussions were grounded in the lived realities of those most affected by Arctic change. Inuit scientists and researchers, often blending traditional knowledge with Western scientific methodologies, contributed invaluable data and perspectives. They observed, documented, and analyzed the changes in their environment, providing critical insights into the complex dynamics of Arctic ecosystems. This collaborative approach, often termed co-production of knowledge, breached the gap between scientific models and local observations, leading to a more holistic understanding of the crisis. For example, community-based monitoring programs where local hunters and elders recorded ice conditions and animal movements provided fine-grained data that satellite imagery alone could not capture. The concept of food security took on new urgency. As traditional hunting and fishing became more precarious, communities explored alternative food sources and innovative ways to preserve their cultural practices. Some communities invested in greenhouses to grow fresh produce, reducing reliance on expensive imported foods. Others focused on strengthening local food networks, ensuring that successful hunts could be shared widely within the community. The emphasis remained on self-sufficiency and maintaining a connection to the land, even as the land itself transformed. Education played a pivotal role in preparing the next generation. Schools incorporated climate change into their curricula, teaching both the science behind the phenomenon and the traditional knowledge for adapting to environmental shifts. Young Inuit, armed with both ancient wisdom and modern tools, became powerful ambassadors for their culture and their future. They used social media, film, and art to share their stories, connecting with a global audience and inspiring action. Despite the monumental challenges, the spirit of resilience that had carried the Inuit through millennia of Arctic winters remained undimmed. Their history was a testament to adaptation, to finding ingenious solutions in the face of adversity. The ability to innovate, to learn from their environment, and to collaborate within their communities had always been their strength. The future of the Arctic, and indeed the planet, hinges significantly on the choices made today. Historians still debate the precise tipping points that led to past climate shifts, but for the Inuit, the present moment is undeniably a critical juncture. Their leadership on the global stage is not just about protecting their own way of life. It is about offering a profound lesson in interconnectedness, in the understanding that the health of one region is inextricably linked to the well-being of all. Their aspirations for the future are deeply rooted in their past, to continue to thrive in their homeland, to pass on their language and culture to their children, and to maintain their profound relationship with the land and sea. They seek a future where their traditional knowledge is respected and integrated into global solutions, where their voices are heard, and where their inherent rights as Indigenous peoples are upheld. They envision a future where technology serves to enhance their traditional practices, not replace them, and where sustainable development is pursued in harmony with the environment. The story of the Inuit, from their ancient migrations across the Bering Land Bridge to their contemporary struggles on the front lines of climate change, is a powerful narrative of human endurance, ingenuity, and cultural tenacity. It is a story etched in ice and wind, in the vastness of the tundra and the depths of the Arctic Ocean. It is a story that continues to unfold, a living testament to the enduring human spirit in the face of an ever-changing world.